Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening based on where you're dialing in from. So this is Dgraph's first webinar, and this webinar is about how to build a Twitter clone app in 10 minutes with GraphQL APIs. I'm Karthic, a community manager at Dgraph Labs. You can find me on Twitter with my handle @hackintoSHR. And we also have a co-presenter, Ahmed. How are you doing, Ahmed?
I'm good. I'm Ahmed, full stack engineer at Dgraph Labs. I'm going to be showing you guys how to actually use these APIs and how to implement them into our React front end.
Great. So we also have our moderators, Jenny and Daniel, with us. And I would like to inform everyone that this session is recorded and you would get a link of the video after the webinar. And also feel free to hit the QA button in your Zoom window and ask any questions. And if it fits into the context, we would answer right there, or otherwise at the end of the webinar in the QA session, we would answer all your questions for sure. So let's get started. So what is this webinar about? This webinar is about how to get started with GraphQL in minutes without having to worry much about writing any backend code. While we learn how to get started with ease, how to get started quickly, we'll also learn how to build GraphQL APIs or GraphQL apps which could scale and perform really well. If you're new to GraphQL, these are the value benefits for GraphQL offers you for an API developer. GraphQL makes it really easy to model and express the data requirements of your application interface. And the query language gives you the flexibility to ask only the data you want. So every time you have a small modifications to your data requirement, you need not create a new API endpoint. You can bank upon the flexibility offered by the query language instead. Do not worry, all through the live demo later, you're going to learn more about GraphQL and its benefits. So this is what we're going to be building in this webinar. So we're going to be building the GraphQL API, which could give you all the functionalities to build a Twitter clone or a Twitter app on your own. And before we get started, here is often the first step in your GraphQL app development journey. The first step is to design or build a GraphQL schema. So if you're wondering what's a GraphQL schema, the GraphQL schema is the definition or the model of data requirements of your application. And it introduces type system for your data, and which in turn gives you integrity and data validation during runtime. Again, don't worry much. We're gonna now go through an exercise to first develop a GraphQL schema. So here's the first step in developing a GraphQL schema. First identify the different entities in your application user interface. In this case, we can see three entities. One is the Twitter user who's actually posting the tweet. And then we have the tweet itself, which is the body of tweet. And then we see the hashtags in each of the tweet. So we have three entities, and each one of them are represented as nodes. And next step is to represent these nodes as GraphQL object types in your GraphQL schema. So using the type keyword, we're representing each one of these nodes, which we saw in the last slide, into, representing them as GraphQL object types. The next step is to identify the fields or the properties of these nodes and represent them as GraphQL scalar types inside the object types. So here we have, you can see that the user type has three fields. A Twitter user has a unique handle, a username, and unique identifier. And this identifier, which can be used to later update or delete any user information, or to even fetch a tweet of a specific user. Similarly, we have an ID for a tweet entity and also the tweet itself. Also, the hashtag has the hashtag string along with its unique identifier. So the next step is to now represent each one of them as GraphQL scalar type, as I mentioned earlier. And using and GraphQL spec offers various data types, and you could see ID and string associated with a couple of fields. And it also offers other types like float, a string, and an array, and so on. So the next step is now to identify the relationship between different entities. So in this diagram, you can see that our user is usually authors the tweet, and the asterisk near the arrowhead tells you that each user can author 0, 1, or more tweets. So now let's go back to the schema and represent this relationship, and you can do so by referencing GraphQL object type inside another GraphQL object type. So in this case, you can see that type user references to the type tweet via the authors field, and the brackets around the tweet object type tells you that a user can have more than one tweet or 0, 1, or any number of tweets. Similarly, the next step is to identify the relationship between the other nodes. As you can see, a tweet can mention another Twitter user via the mention edge. And similarly, a tweet can also have 0, 1, or more hashtags in it. Right. So again, we'll repeat the process to represent this relationship in your GraphQL schema. Now we have the GraphQL schema ready, a GraphQL schema which represents all the entities in your application user interface and also the relationship between them. But just the schema is not enough to get functional GraphQL APIs. So similar to how you would develop APIs in REST world, you need to also run a web server, create resolvers, which is similar to API handlers, and also run the database and use a database ORM or a database client library to make these connections. But in Dgraph, we identified that there is a lot of pain, there's a lot of time our developer needs to spend to go from their GraphQL schema and to get all the way to get a functional GraphQL API. And we made it really simple. So in a live demo, we're going to learn how you can just take the GraphQL schema and get functional, scalable, and production-ready GraphQL APIs right out of the box without any backend code. So before we jump into the live demo, so let's understand a bit more about what's Dgraph. So Dgraph is a distributed, transactional, and open source native GraphQL database. So if you're wondering what's a GraphQL database, and here's why we call Dgraph GraphQL our native GraphQL database. So Dgraph is the only open source database to natively support official GraphQL spec. So what it means for you as a user is that you can initiate the database just with the GraphQL schema, no tables, no layers, no need to know any of the database internals or even the schema mapping. In short, GraphQL is a first-class citizen of Dgraph. So as you build your apps and your requirement evolves, you may want to modify the types, modify the database indices, and maybe modify the graph model itself and change how these entities are related to each other. And you can do that natively just by modifying the GraphQL schema, and all of it happens without any downtime live. Your GraphQL apps benefit from the performance of GraphQL or Dgraph GraphQL. So Dgraph does native GraphQL interpretation, storage, and execution. So which means there's no layering. There is no need to convert the GraphQL queries to another database language. So again, there's no need to iterate over the results to generate more queries, which are typically how you would build resolvers. And Dgraph can resolve deep queries just in one database call. Basically, there's no N+1 problem. I already mentioned that Dgraph is a distributed database, and it also offers capabilities like auto sharding and synchronous replication. And your apps can utilize these features to scale well, and it's also resilient against failures. Start with just one node, and as your data size and load increase, just add more nodes to the cluster and scale the database on the fly without any downtime. And Dgraph GraphQL is completely adheres to GraphQL spec, so which means that you can use the GraphQL APIs with your favorite tools in the GraphQL ecosystem. Okay, now it's time for a live demo. So Ahmed, over to you.
All right, thank you, Karthik. So just a heads up for the person who asked the question, Daniel will get you, one of our moderators, will answer that via text. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you guys how to take the schema, turn it into usable API endpoints, and then how to use it from the front end. Okay, so the first thing we're going to have to do is we will run the Dgraph standalone image. You'll have to have Docker installed, right? So very simple. Just run the standalone image and you're ready to go. This image is made for quick development. Not very recommended for production. We will go over why in the GitHub repo that we'll send you. So the next step is to open up something like Postman. So Postman, we're using this for sending the schema to Dgraph. As you can see, we're hitting the /admin/schema endpoint with the schema we just made, with one exception. I'm going to explain what I just added here. But the last tool that we're going to use is GraphQL Playground, right? Feel free to use any GraphQL querying tool that you want to use, graphical, whatever. So let's get started. So as you can see, I just copied the schema that we made in the beginning with Karthic, right? So as you can see, we just copied the schema that we made in the beginning with Karthic, right? The one exception is I added a has inverse. So what this does is it links both these fields together so that we can actually see who is the author of the tweet from the tweet itself. If this is confusing, we'll explain it more inside the GitHub repo we're going to send you. Okay, so let's send this over to Dgraph. You'll see that we get a success message. That means that our schema is now live. So now we want to actually start using these APIs. So if you open up the docs here, you'll see that Dgraph has automatically generated a bunch of resolvers for us. To be exact, it generates 5 separate CRUD resolvers for each object type. So you can see we have get user, query user, right? Add user, update user, and delete user. And same thing for tweets, same thing for hashtags, right? This saves you a lot of time from having to write these manually. Oh, by the way, just a heads up, if any of you guys want to ask questions, feel free, put them in the Q&A. We will get to them right after. Right. Okay, so back to this. So now we have our schema. We've added it to Dgraph. It's created the functions for us. Now we actually want to start adding data into this, right? So we're going to use a mutation. Mutation is anything that adds or changes data, right? We're going to use the add user function that we just talked about. And then for the input, as you can see, input is an array, so you can pass in multiple. We're just going to pass in one right now. We're going to create a new user called Prashant, right? He's going to have a tweet, excited for GraphQL Asia. He has some tags, hashtags, and he has some mentions, right? So we're going to go ahead, push that in, right? Now you see Prashant has been added, but the cool thing is that it also creates the tweet automatically, adds it in, creates the tags automatically, adds them in, creates the mentions automatically, and adds them in, right? So you don't have to add everything in one by one. You can add everything in all at once. Okay, so now we have this data in here. How do we query it? So let's look at the query tweet. So pretty much this is a query. We're using the query tweet function, but as you can see, we don't have any brackets here because what we're asking is, can you query every single tweet we've made? And then down here, these fields are what we're asking GraphQL to return, or Dgraph to return. So we want the tweet body, obviously. We want all the mentions and the handles, and we want all the tags, right? We can also add the author if we want. So even though we didn't specify the author, even though we didn't specify the author in the first part, right? You can see that it automatically, using the reverse predicate, figures out who the author is, adds it as a field, right? So we have a bunch of other tweets saved in here, but as you can see, it returns all of the tweets. Okay. So moving on, let's look at the front end that we're going to be using. So this is a basic React front end. This is going to be provided to you in an email. And if you think this is going too fast, you can't follow along, don't worry. This is all recorded. You're going to get a recording after. And you're going to get all the code samples, all the queries, everything we're using in this presentation. So you can follow along at your own speed, right? But this is what we're going to be using. We're using a front end. If I refresh, you can see that the new tweet by Prashant was added, right? This front end, what it will let you do is you can see the tweets, you can log in, right, with a username, and then you can create tweets, and you'll be able to search them. So right now, the schema we've created is nice. We can query all the tweets. We can get tweets or users or anything by ID, but we can't do any searching. So let's say we want to add some search functionality. Let's start with the user, okay? So let's say we want to search by user by their exact name, right? Or let's say their exact handle, right? So we add a search directive. And then inside this, we add what kind of index we want. So there's a bunch of different kinds of indices. We're going to cover the 3 main ones used by strings here. But let's start with hash. So hash pretty much lets you search for an exact match, nothing else. Right? So we got the success. Let's go back to GraphQL Playground. So now we can search for users. We want to search for a user with the name Prashant, right? As you can see, now the filter has new fields. It has a name field, right? And in the name, you have equal. You can combine with and, or, not, right? Okay. So we want to search by name. So let's add this to name. All right. So let's run this again. Now we can see that it returns the user Prashant. Okay. Let's say we want to actually update Prashant. Okay. So we need to get his ID. So let's run the same query again. Now we have his ID, and we want to change his name. Okay. Let's say we want to change his name to Ahmed, right? So we enter the ID that we just got. We run a mutation, update user. So we have a filter which tells the GraphQL which record to update, and set, which is what to update. So we'll run this. We'll see that we've changed the name. And now if we go back to the front end and refresh, we'll see that his name and his handle has changed, right? So yeah, this is how you can update. But now let's say we want a bit more advanced searching. Okay, let's say we want to search a user by part of their name. Okay, we want to search by user's last name. So let's go back here. Let's change this hash to regex, right? Send that to Dgraph. So regex gives it reject capability. I'm sure most of you are familiar with regex. So if we go here, now you can see that there is a new function, regex. So you can pass in any regular expression here. I'm just going to pass in my last name. We'll search, and it returns the new user we just created, right? But you can pass in any regular expression. You can put in patterns. So if I wanted all users, right, I would turn all of the users, for example. So this makes your username search much more powerful. But now let's say we want to search tweet bodies for specific words. Okay, I want to search the tweet body. So let's add another index. So this index is called the full text index. This will let you search, as you will see, this is very powerful. It'll let you search by terms. So let's send this over to Dgraph. Wait until our schema is updated. Okay. Now let's go back here. So let's say I want to search any tweet in our database that has any of these terms, right? GraphQL, oranges, and Europe, right? So let's try this. So we'll see it actually returns a GraphQL Asia and a GraphQL Canada search, right? So what this does is actually it will use these terms and it will see if any of them exist in the tweet body, right? Out of the box, no effort needed by you. So the really cool thing about this full text index is you can do stuff like this. So as you can see, the tweet is excited for GraphQL Asia along with blah, 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 right? But let's say I want to search for things that are exciting. I don't want excited. I'm searching for exciting. You'll see that the same tweets still come up, right? This is because the full text index is actually smart enough to understand that words share the same root, right? And it will search based on that. So I can put excite, it'll still show up. But if I put something like hype, they won't show up, right? So you can put the word in any form and it will still find it for you, which is really cool. So the other index that the full text offers us is the all of text. So let's say I want to search for a tweet that has GraphQL Asia, let's say for example. So you can see that only the GraphQL Asia tweets will show up, right? Yeah, so this covers the full text index. So with these new functions that you've learned, you should be able to create an app in pretty much under 10 minutes. You feel free to try it yourself once we send out the video and the GitHub repo. Download the React frontend, get the schema up and running, and see how fast you can create the Twitter app. So we're going to be moving over to the Q&A right now, but just a quick heads up, we're going to be sending a quick 2-minute survey at the end of this. We'd love if you can give us your feedback so we can make these webinars better, because we're planning to make a bunch of them. So back over to Karthik, and thank you guys.
Thank you, Ahmed, for the demo and taking everyone through the process of how to develop GraphQL APIs for Dgraph GraphQL. So now it's time for some questions and answers. It's still not too late. Feel free to post your questions. And I see that we have a question by Gilbert. Gilbert's asking, does Dgraph have data access controls, or do we need to proxy through your own server for that? That's a good question. So Gilbert, at this point in time, with our last release, we still do not have auth built into Dgraph GraphQL. But in our upcoming release, we're going to have auth, which gives you fine-grained control of, using which you can do things like allow an author to edit their posts and view all other posts and stuff like that. So it gives you fine-grained access control abilities. And we also have subscription and custom logic feature that's coming up in our next release, which is going to be soon, maybe in a week or so.
Okay, so Balu is asking if you just send the schema to Dgraph via Postman and that's it, and all the changes are instantly reflected. Yes, that's it. Literally, you send the schema to Dgraph. Dgraph will create the resolvers for you, and that's it. As you saw, I was switching back and forth from Dgraph and Postman. This is live. This isn't like pre-made. And I'm querying with different indexes. I'm using the schema. So, yep, everything is instant.
Great. So looks like that's all the questions we got. And finally, here are some of the resources, useful resources to look at to learn more about Dgraph GraphQL. We have docs. It's a good resource. It's got a bunch of good resources and guides to get started. And then we have the GraphQL page where you can learn about all the new features that's coming up with Dgraph GraphQL. And then we have the blog where you can stay up to date with all the new announcements and blogs. And we also have, I already mentioned Dgraph is open source. Feel free to go and check out how we implemented Dgraph GraphQL and do star us if you like the project. Meanwhile, again, everyone feel free to ask more questions if you have. Let me just quickly see whether we have some more questions.
We do.
Maybe just give a few more seconds to see if we got.
So we got a couple more questions. So let me start answering some of these while we wait for more questions to come in. So can you explain how subscriptions will work in the upcoming release? So subscriptions will actually open a WebSocket to Dgraph, and every second or so, it will query the database to see if there's anything new and push it to you. So you'll be getting pushed new. So you will send in a query. You'll say, let's say query tweet, right? I want to see all of the new tweets. Let's say I want my tweet feed to be live, right? I will send in that query, and then every second or so, it will push any new updates to that. Hopefully that answers your question, Terry. So do you want to cover any of these, or do you want me to just answer the next one?
Yeah, I see a question from Hasa. Hasa's asking, can we have documents and session log for this? I'm assuming that Hasa is asking about, maybe are we sharing the slides and the materials, if I'm not wrong. So you can expect an email from us after the webinar, which contains all the resources, links to the video, and I guess even the presentation. Okay. Do we have some more questions?
Yep, we have a couple more. So somebody's asking, can we customize the NEF text logic, which is automatically found in the words with similar root? That's a good question. I don't think so, because we use some pretty complicated algorithms to make this performance. But we can check for that for you and maybe send it over. And yeah, Hasa, we are sending everything through email. We're going to be sending the GitHub repo with all the code, all the queries, everything you need to make the Twitter clone, right? And you're going to be getting this video so you can replay it at your own pace, see exactly how it's working, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Just to add to what Ahmed just said, for any kind of customizations or custom logic, you could always build that in your web service layer. And also in the upcoming release, we would have a custom logic feature where on the fly, you could refer to a remote URL and stitch those results with the results from Dgraph GraphQL on the fly. That could help and make it easier for you to implement any custom logic if necessary.
So I'm guessing this is about the full text answer, the full text index. So if you're looking for like a high level of customization, maybe regex would be the thing you'd be looking for, right? That will work with any language, obviously, and it's as customizable as you need it to be.
Right. Do we have any more questions, Ahmed?
Yeah, there's a last one. Actually, two more. So for the Flask support, we don't have direct Flask support, but we do have a Python client. Should be pretty trivial to hook that up to Flask.
Yep. I mean, with Dgraph GraphQL being GraphQL, I mean, complying with GraphQL spec, you can use any of your favorite GraphQL client libraries in any of the languages. So Python's got a bunch of them, and JavaScript has, and every language has an implementation for a GraphQL client. And that's an advantage of having a spec compliant, query language. So you need not depend on a proprietary or a vendor-made client library. You could use any of your favorite tools from the ecosystem. I guess we have one more question. So looking for external database via GraphQL, Dgraph for WordPress project. No GraphQL plugin at all on WordPress repo. Are you planning to release a WordPress plugin? I mean, thanks for bringing this up. We'll definitely be looking at a bunch of integration with other projects too. And now we're going to definitely add WordPress into the list, but you can stay tuned on other integrations which we're going to be doing. So you can mostly expect Gatsby integration maybe in a quarter, but now we'll definitely consider the WordPress plugin. So we're going to take up a last question. We just see one more question here. How would Angular support? So as I mentioned earlier, right, this is the biggest advantage of being GraphQL spec compliant. So you can use the GraphQL client libraries for any of the framework. In this case, Ahmed used Apollo library for React.js. I think Apollo also has an Angular library too, also for Vue.js and other frameworks. So you could plug that within your Angular applications.
So to add on to that, I'm actually using the Apollo client, which is just JavaScript. You can use it with any JavaScript. But like Karthik said, there is specific integration with Angular, React, Vue, I think Ember. So yes, there is. You can decide to use the generic client, or you can use the specific Angular one. It'll make more sense once you see the code examples.
Great. Just let's wait for a minute or so to see if we have some more questions. Again, feel free to shoot more questions at us. Please don't hesitate. I see that we have, do we have a question? Nope. Great. It's great to see a lot of enthusiasm from all the participants. A lot of very interesting questions indeed. So I would like to say that, it's thank you everyone for joining in our first webinar. And please follow us up on Twitter. And this is our handle at @Dgraph Labs. I guess this may be the simplest way with which you can stay tuned with all the updates and maybe announcements for our future webinars too. And I think also you can check out our website. You can find links to our community Slack channel. Feel free to join the channel and try out Dgraph GraphQL. And that's a place where all of us hang out along with the community, and you can get answers for all your queries. So again, thanks for joining in. Thanks for your valuable time. Looking forward to have you all soon in our next webinar. So have a good day. Good night.